I would say kind of at that halfway mark of this offseason relative to, the OTAs and the mini camp. You guys have covered it long enough. When you get to the mini camp, it's very similar to the OTAs. There's just a little bit more time in the schedule those days, but the practices themselves look very familiar. Had a great visit with Steve Foley, talked with him early this morning, and then Riley Odoms, of course, isn't here, but had a chance to visit with him. Here's the thing for me, my memory of these guys, and we all have different memories of generations of players, but this was the 7-Eleven Slurpee Cup era when all of these guys, you traded Slurpee Cups, and this was the 70s and the early 80s. And then just, his story, visiting with the team, someone who was a high school quarterback, a college quarterback. 8th round, there's a head coach who's got a vision for someone. And I didn't realize that at one point, his brother was the center, he was the quarterback, and he threw a pass to his other brother, the receiver, in college. That's pretty amazing. So there's some New Orleans ties. He went to Jesuit High School. And so we followed, I remember those defenses. And I think his late defensive coordinator, Joe Collier, would be real proud today of both of the inductions. So it was great to have him around and visit with our players. And so any questions?
When the young guys get to see players who have done great things, get in the Ring of Fame, can you see that inspire them or see that?
Yeah, look, this morning my message, I read the bios of both of these players. I think it's important for them to appreciate the history, embrace it, and I shared some other earlier stories with them about it. But I said, look, you'll remember this meeting. There's going to be a number of you in this room that will go through this, and I just can't tell you who, but it'll mean a lot to you, and it certainly means a lot to these players the further they're removed. But it's only special because they won, and to be a part of those 2 Super Bowls that he was, and look, Riley's drafted as a tight end. Was he 4th or 5th pick overall? That was unprecedented. I mean, I think for that position, University of Houston. So yeah, I think the young players don't think about it right now. And Steve's message was very good. He said, we didn't think about that. We thought about playing for each other and winning, and the other stuff takes care of itself.
What do you remember in general about that 77 Orange Crush team?
Well, look, there were so many different names. Back then, the one challenge was what you were served television-wise. So you didn't have access like we do today, and depending on where you lived, you might just get the Monday Night Football highlights from Howard Cosell. Like you didn't have the ESPN rundown or Red Zone or pay-per-view, and so there was a stretch where there were 8 or 10 defenses that got nicknames. And so that was one of the teams, one of the early teams that had a nickname. I don't know where they sat relative to the Purple People Eaters there was a handful of teams that defenses got nicknames. And so, but obviously they played out of an Okie front. Collier was so far, when you listen to Belichick and Parcells and coaches that we know of today talk about his impact as a defensive coach. There's you get the right talent and the right coaching, and you end up having something.
Sean, you've been a bunch of places that have lots of distinguished alumni, but how, cool is it to have as many that have been around just in your year here?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was sharing this with Patrick. I like when we go to stadiums to look around and look at the Ring of Honor, and every once in a while I'll see something and be like, how does this team have 32 guys in the Ring of Honor and they've never been to a Super Bowl? So I'm kind of picky. when I went to New Orleans, they didn't have a Ring of Honor, and ours is the Ring of Fame, correct? But we created that, but with the idea that it was, if we had to spend 5 minutes discussing a candidate, he probably is, so we wanted it to be special. And I think when you look at ours, they're clear-cut, easy. You guys have seen them longer than me. But I like doing that at different stadiums. I give Joe Lombardi a hard time. His grandfather, Vince Lombardi, the late Vince Lombardi, is obviously in the Packer Ring of Fame, but, I go to Washington and I'm thinking, there needs to be someone policing these Ring of Fames. I think he was there for just over a year. But I think that, I think that was one of the enticing things about this job was the history and the importance of a team where it really matters.
Sean, after evaluating Marvin's rookie year, what were the challenges made to him about the areas that he could kind of take a leap?
I think one of the challenges, I've said this, and I'll say it again, we were as much responsible for, I don't want to say holding him back, but man, you're trying to get snaps with Jerry, you're trying to get snaps with Cortland, and so I think we'll see a lot of growth from year 1 to year 2. He's tough. He made a real good play today. We know he's a good returner. We felt that was one of the strengths, obviously, that we saw on tape. But we saw transitional speed. We saw the things that you need to have at that receiver position. So I don't think it was his development as much as, and I don't want to say a crowded room, but just, trying to create enough touches for those guys. And now we have a room, and look, we have a lot of young players. I think size is certainly something you see at the receiver position right now. And I'm anxious as we go through this process to watch these guys. This first half of these OTAs have gone really good. I mean, really good. And I told them that. I like the energy. I feel like we're younger. And you kind of feel that at practice.
Without foresight, how did you're kind of sitting and watching help him, and what has he shown out that last couple?
Yeah, look, we knew when we drafted him he was extremely intelligent. That's pretty cool. Is that coming from Colorado Springs?
Yes.
We could tell Steve we got him a flyover, too. Hey, that was your flyover. I think we knew we were drafting a highly intelligent player, and you could see that in his film. I think that's a trait certainly that helps at center, and both he and Luke are we're rotating. I've told the coaches, and I think it's important for you all to know, man, don't read into any type of rotation now. I'm trying to get combinations of players. The quarterbacks are rotating 1s, 2s, and 3s. But it just so happened that we've gone every third day, and you guys have seen Nick's running with the 1s, so that's a little bit of a coincidence. But the centers are doing the same thing. I think, to answer your question specifically, I think it's one of his strong suits. And it's one of the reasons why I sat down with him a little bit to discuss Nick's. I knew I'd get a pretty intelligent answer, a responsible answer, a thoughtful answer, and he's got high football IQ.
Relative to competition, Coach, relative to competition, OTAs, you can't have a lot of contact, so how do you evaluate, running back competition?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's harder for the linebackers, the offense and defensive line, and the running backs. I can think of a number of players, younger players that I've had at running back specifically, that you kind of think about how they're going to be when the pads come on, and then it's entirely different. Obviously, it's a little easier in these type of drills to evaluate the perimeter, the defensive backs, the receivers, quarterbacks. But I do think, understand this, the end game and the number one goal is to get to the right 53 at the end of training camp. And so there's an installation that we're going through right now. Let's call it a 9 or 10 day installation. We're on third down yesterday and today. We gave it 2 days. Red zone will be on Monday, and we'll follow that pattern through mini camp. And then when they come back for training camp, we start that same installation pattern again. The repetition obviously is a key element in learning. And so even though you might be at one of those positions, alignment, assignment, your fits, you're getting something. But you have to be careful as coaches not to instantly or early evaluate. The evaluation is going to come. All of it counts. All of it matters. We're looking at all of it, but it really clicks in when you start putting the pads on and getting to see how because those pads sometimes define or undefine certain players, and I think that you mentioned some of the positions it's more difficult to evaluate.
Bo Nix look better now after 6 OTAs than.
It's hard for me to refresh, it's hard for me to only catch you up on a Netflix series. You guys watch one and then you miss 3 and then you watch one and I'm trying to catch you up, but all 3 of them are doing well. Specifically to Bo, he's doing really well. He's picking it up. There's a lot that's going in. He's throwing the ball extremely well.
You've spoken highly of Davis since you hired him, but
yeah.
What did you learn about his coaching ability over last year, and what's his challenge like this year?
Yeah, he's in that new generation, and I like it. There's energy, how he presents in a room. Look, he's got every one of his high school, college, and pro game plans downloaded into files, PDFs that I would have no idea how to get to, and he can upload, and so he's someone that when we install throughout the week, he's punching into his computer, and so his meetings are extremely organized. He's played the position. I think even as a player at this level, when you talk to, and I spoke with Eli and various players he was tremendous on keeping things simple and knowing how to read certain plays and how to approach the game. I think he's very positive with these guys. And, he was, you heard the story. I mean, when I interviewed him, you get kind of caught in a schedule. All right, then tomorrow we're going to interview, and then here he is driving to the airport, and I'm thinking, what am I doing? And we called the driver and brought him back and hired him. So, look, I think it's a great challenge for him. I think when you're a coach and when you're a young coach, and you've got a room like we've got now. Zach's done a good job. He's picked things up, and of course, Stiddy is probably the senior statesman, the veteran of the group, and he's still young. We're encouraged with that room, but I think that Davis brings energy, experience, and almost like that wily veteran quarterback that's in the room. Which I think is a plus.
Sean, you've talked about players coming off an ACL often being better in the second year. With that in mind, how's Javonte Williams been looking?
He's been looking good. I think historically speaking, when you talk to the experts, they say, the complete heel finishes at 2 years. Obviously, you begin playing before then. But he's been doing well. He's in shape. I know that he's looking forward to the challenge last year. Really is when you think about it. Even in training camp, it was still early enough in the process where it was hard for him, to go full speed with confidence, and yet, we were building kind of and getting him where we all felt comfortable that he could play. And so I think he's looking forward to this year, and certainly the confidence in his health and the strength of his knee.
Without Justin Simmons here, what defensive player have you seen kind of pick up leadership on this team? Who do you want?
Well, I'm not rooting for. I mean, I'm rooting for all of them relative to leadership, but I think PJ's a guy that you feel it from. Just on the back end, it's a young group, and I think that's something that is really a little bit more organic. I think it'll come from some of the guys in the defensive front. It'll come from some of the guys, Browning at outside backer. I've seen that from him. And I think that's something that kind of evolves a little bit. And then, but it's felt a lot different, not with any one new player or any one certain player removed. There's something about the youth and energy that we're going through right now that's contagious.
With Cody
Talking
Barton,
last week about
1 second.
with Cody Barton, among available inside linebackers, what made him a scheme set and personality?
Well, first off, there were two elements to it. We saw, he had a chance really for the first time in his career to play a large part of his season as a starter. So we saw that. We saw the good. We saw the things that weren't as good. And we always knew that he was an A special teams player. And so the vision became easy relative to, hey, he comes in and competes for Mike, and we know he's someone that also can play a four-core teams role for us. But there's open competition there, and we've got Jonah, we've got like 3 or 4 players that we're going to rotate through, and again, that's one where once the pads get on, I think it'll be a little bit easier to evaluate. But Cody was someone that we got to see more defensive snaps from last year than at any point in his career. And so there was a clear vision relative to, all right, what he can do at linebacker and then what he can do in the kicking game. And he's young.
Peyton Manning last week said one of the things about transitioning to the NFL was the tight window throws and figuring out where you can get one in, where you can't. Is that a trial and error thing for guys, or how do you work with them?
Yeah, I think that I think that it's like you immediately begin to feel the speed difference and the reaction difference in the length, and so what was open in college, those windows were bigger. Generally speaking, then, you begin to adapt to the timing. One of the things that all of these guys get the ball out quick. And so holding on to the ball, and waiting can sometimes be obviously detrimental. And I think it's the study and the understanding of the defensive scheme, and then understanding where the windows are in regards to spacing. But I do think that begins the first time you're out here and everyone's moving around full speed. It's like, wow, the speed of your simulator just went up a little bit.
I know guys missed time, obviously, this time you're with Audric. You saw him drop out last week. Is it anything?
Yeah, no, and I'll just be honest with Audric. So we went ahead, had a PRP. We did a small scope procedure just to make sure everything's clean. It is. He'll be available at the start of training camp, so we won't see him working through the rest of these OTAs, but on the conservative side, he's going to be just fine. It was all good news, and he'll stay in rehab, but he'll be full go at the start of training camp.
It's a knee.
Yeah, it's a knee.
Riley Moss, is something up with him? Right?
No, he tweaked. He had a muscle spasm in his back. It was still sore today. He'll probably be back out Monday. So today was the first day he missed. He and I both tweaked something in our backs, but I'm sure they were differently related.
When you talk about the seeing different combinations of players, does it make a difference to see each center with each quarterback, or does center get?
I want to see the centers with the different guards. I want to see the quarterbacks with the different offensive lines. And look, there's a lot ahead of us where you begin to then, and so that's why, my message to the coaches is like, rotate them in there. I'm not going to look at a practice snap and get upset because Billy's in with this group. I'm not. And so this is the time of the season where you can do that, and not worry about, the quarterback's getting hit because you have a younger offensive lineman maybe at one position, so I want to see the rotations, and they don't have to follow a set pattern. And it's important to tell the players that too.
Do you leave that up to them, or do you get involved?
No, we'll talk about it. I mean, we'll meet today, and we're gonna, in our meeting this afternoon, we've already shelled out next week, so we're gonna shell out mini camp this afternoon. We'll talk about where our guys are at right now. We'll talk about, the roles and the rotations. We'll talk about player weights for training camp. That's in today's meeting. We'll talk about, there's a couple different training camp schedules that I'm looking at. Just, when I say our A schedule, that's our standard schedule. Currently we practice in the AM. We have walkthroughs in the PM. I want to look at that. We play a number of East Coast games this year. I've talked to a few coaches relative to, who's had success going east for the early game. In the last 8 years, really Seattle has been one of those teams. Had a chance to visit with Pete, had a chance to visit with Kyle and Sean. Who are the notable teams that have done well? And it's kind of funny, generally speaking, they're good teams. So you're always looking for, like, what's that edge? Or, generally, I can recall there were a lot of demons we had to overcome in New Orleans because we had never won on the road in cold weather when it was below 40 degrees, and there was a lot of nevers. And once the teams got good enough, then you began to exercise and get rid of some of those things. And so, but we have 4 of those games, and so I do think it's important to at least, because this is the first time for me coaching on a mountain time zone. I feel like it's easy going west. And I say that it's easy going west, but returning for the next week is challenging. So the challenge always seems to involve when you're heading east and losing time. But when you head west, you're gaining time, you have plenty of rest, and it's the return after you've played a West Coast game the next week, and then obviously out here, it's the game you're playing. It's not the return.
You've talked about the new kickoff alignment and the rule. I've seen some teams considering using a position player to kick so they'd have an extra tackler. Is that something you would consider and how you would evaluate?
Well, look, I think in year one of this, you're going to see what you see in week 1 and what you see in week 8 can be dramatically different. All of us, but I get it. If you feel like you have someone that you're comfortable enough. Now, it'll be the first year where, follow me, there's 3 kick scenarios that maybe aren't returned where the ball could go to the 20, the 30, or the 40. Now, there's always been in the history of our game only 2 scenarios. We always knew 40 if it went out of bounds, and then we went through 20 and then 25. All right. But now there's 3. And so that'll take everyone a while to figure out. And so I think a lot of it is going to be dependent on what our goal is structurally as to putting it in the landing zone, and then who is that player that we're talking about. If you have that player, then that's interesting. It's a good idea.
Right. To be capable or functional.
Yeah, I don't want to be one out of every 4 going to the 40 though, because he's kicked out of bounds. But he's there to make a tackle. But I think you will see a lot of change in every one of us, and I'm just as anxious as you are to see it. We're trying to go through it. Ben, our special team coaches, we're practicing it. We had the officials in yesterday. They kind of went through all the rule changes, but specifically we spent probably a half an hour on this. And I would say the one thing for you, it's the kick's made, no one moves, and when it's caught, we all move. And I would liken that to being on second base and I'm tagging up, and so I'm watching, and when the ball's caught, I can go to third. So I'm periffering, you're going to see that if you leave early, it's a foul.
Right.
And so it would be very similar. Now, there was a time when most of these guys played baseball. Now, maybe a third of these guys have played baseball, but I would say you've never tagged up on a fly ball. But I think that's what it'll be like timing-wise as you wait to move.
Is this something where there may be so much work required, so much of a sample size need to learn, that you change how you do training camp practices on teams and do more kickoff work than previously?
Well, I think you're certainly going to devote more of your special teams time to this. Like, think about just a year ago where you controlled if you wanted a touchback pretty much, right? And so you might only have 2 returns in. You might play a team that's 92% touchback driven. Now, you play at altitude, it might be more than that. You play at a place where it's windy, you might have 4. But now, the time spent on kick and kick coverage will go up. And then who's doing it, I think, can change. I think the body types will be a little bigger. And then who's catching it can change. The decision makers as these balls are coming, let's say line drives into making the decision, is it going to go into the end zone? There's a lot that goes into it. But I would agree with what you said in that certainly the same amount of time we devoted a year ago to kickoff, kick return will not be the same amount we devote this year.